Feeling adventurous.
Okay. Yeah, if you've got hands, use them.
And then if I'm feeling adventurous, I might pace the stage dramatically, but we'll see.
That's awesome.
You could even dance here.
Well, yeah, the square dance maybe. Cool. Well, I'll take a seat in the audience and
Fantastic. We'll see
break
you
a leg.
soon.
Thanks.
Hey, Thomas.
We'll give people like another minute or so.
Okay.
Yes. A couple more bodies in here. That's good.
So I did an announce all there, a message all. There were 13 people hanging out there. So yeah.
Cool. I think we're just about ready to go.
Yeah, I'm seeing 26 in the space cell, and as of yet none into spillover rooms. So maybe we won't have to use the. We don't have to worry about the mirrored room, but we'll see. I'll keep an eye on it. You don't need to.
Okay. I'll just think about the important things.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right. We'll get rolling now. Hi, everyone. My name is Sally Calloway. I'm the chair of the Tutorials and Workshops track, and thank you for joining us for this second day of the AVAR conference. This kind of like Pacific Northwest midday session is all focused on immersive music, which is going to be super cool and super topical. I've got some sad faces. Is there something I can do better to fix a sad face situation?
Yeah, Sal, since we have plenty of time, we did this in the
Okay.
did this in the plenary session. Let's take even if it takes 5 or 10 minutes. Let's get everybody.
Okay. Okay.
And before we start, let's see. How do we do this? I'm open to any suggestions. Let's see. First, let me see if anybody cannot hear me. Give me a sad face now. If you can't hear me talking, sad face now. Okay, so everybody in the room can hear me. And now let me see. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. There's one person in space 580. Oh, 30 of 30. Yeah, we just reached capacity. Okay, so 2. Okay, so we are going to be echoing into front row spaces, which are the cloned rooms. So Jemek and Sal, I think this might take 5 minutes or so. So if you guys would give us permission. Morgan, let's get this straightened out. Let's see. We actually tested videos this morning, but that's kind of a hassle. So I think let's first just test appearance. So I'm going to go, Morgan. I'm going to go over into the mirrored room and see what do I have to do? Maybe reset space over there or something. What should I do over there?
Yeah, just reset it, and then don't forget to go on air if you want to let everyone know what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not even.
And
Oh, wait a
megaphone.
minute. You know what? That's all it is. I'm not even on air. Oh my gosh, how embarrassing.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm on
Oh,
air.
how
Can everyone hear
silly.
me?
Let's see. Sad faces for anybody who can't hear me or Sal you talk to.
I am also talking, so we're doing a
So-
quick little test of whether
Yeah.
you can hear us when we talk on the stage.
So sad faces from anybody who can't hear both me and Sal. Go ahead, talk. So and Jemek too.
I'm
Jemek
also
talk too.
talking.
Yeah.
Yes, there's
Yeah.
3 of us talking.
Right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
3 of us talking now. If
a
a
lot of
sad
happy
face if you
faces.
can't hear us.
Sad
And we would
faces,
see
you
the
can't.
emojis from the other room even. Oh, there we go. Look. Oh, was that a sad face or was that a happy face?
Well, actually,
Hard
you
to
should ask
tell.
if they hear us, because if they don't hear us, how they will know what
Yeah.
they're asking?
Oh, good. Okay, who can hear all 3 of us? Come on, guys, talk. Jemek, Sal,
Okay,
we're going to
we're
talk.
all talking.
Row, row, row your boat gently
1,
down
2,
the
3.
stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Oh, look at
Okay.
that. Okay, I'm going to pop over to the other space real quick. If you can't hear
Okay.
us, sad face. Oh, there
I
we
just
go.
sent
Nice.
a message. I sent a
Smart.
message that said sad face if you can't hear us.
Okay, and
Did we
I'm
see
not
any
seeing
sad
any
faces?
sad faces.
Oh,
Oh, there's one. Oh, is that Milan Jelinek? You can't hear us? Oh. Okay, Milan, try re-entering the space. Go to your main menu, click on the blue triangle of your compass menu, and then go to Settings at the bottom, and then go under General, go under Re-enter Space. It'll kick you back out to the patio, and I'll bet you can hear us when you get back. That's a very hopeful statement on my part, but try that if you can't hear. I think our numbers are pretty good, so I'm going to get off stage and let you guys carry on.
So we're going to kick it off?
I think so. I think you can.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all ready then.
Let's go.
Cool. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for your patience and letting us test out the audio situation. It's always good to make sure we get maximal happy faces before we start with the presenter. So this session today, this midday, sort of middle of the day in the Pacific Northwest session, is all about immersive music. And our first presenter for the day is Przemyslaw, and he'll be presenting on, the title of his presentation is Envelopment versus Directivity, a Golden Rule for VR Phonography. And from his abstract, it looks like the content is going to be focusing quite a lot on exploring the nuance of documenting music performance in VR, which I think is going to be an absolutely fantastic thing. I've heard that there's some very interesting videos, so we'll get lots of in VR experience or detail that we can chew on. I will now hand it over and let you take the floor for the next hour, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Sally. Hello, everyone. My name is Przemek, and I work at the Fryderyk Chopin University of Music in Poland. And my main interests are spatial audio, immersive, and interactive productions. And I wanted to show you how is my real face looking, because in the times of pandemics, we not only avatars, but people with flesh and blood. So I'm involved in a number of activities around XR technology, already mentioned immersive audiovisual music productions, and I'm also involved in interactive productions. For example, you may have seen videos from Zilia company, microphone company, their new VR demo that was showing 6DOF system. I was responsible for production of that VR app, and on IAS Vienna back in this year, you could see my virtual avatar music controller for music performance called Connection. But today I want to present my concepts regarding immersive audiovisual music productions. And this workshop is meant to be a part of a series that I am willing to do on a yearly basis. After each year of my work, I will summarize my experiences and present them on events like AES conference, AVAR. First edition of this series was held in Dublin last year, and was basically most about the production of the immersive music documentaries. This year I wanted to add some of my experiences from different category of such productions, and I created 3 categories to make it more clearer for the purpose of this presentation. And first one is already mentioned, immersive music documentaries. That means live concerts, stage performances, music field recordings. The second category is cinematic VR experiences with diegetic music, so feature films, but 360 or 360 3D films, and immersive theater. And the third category is immersive music videos with non-diegetic music or partially diegetic music. And these categories overlap on each other, but in general there are some traits to each of them, so using this categorization can help communicate, for example, with the rest of your crew. And I wanted to introduce some of my ideas about spatial audio in context of creating music content with visuals. So spatial audio perception is highly determined by visual cues. It's called ventriloquism effect, and if you are going to be aware of that, you can use this as a creative tool. It is important when you are doing a spatial arrangement on the stage. Second thing is that current VR video technology is not a perfect simulation of human vision. It's far from that. It's more like diving in a cloudy water. So we need to adapt to this fact. The VR cameras are limited to 4-meter radius of the sharp image. Everything that goes further is getting less and less detailed. And the secondary distance is between 4 and 8 meters. And everything that is farther than 8 meters is considered more to be a background. So knowing these traits of VR cameras will let you plan the sound in the scene. You can use that characteristic to exhibit what is important in the presented material. Here is a typical frame from a 360 3D video, and this is a originally 4K video frame. So sphere for each eye has around 2K resolution, because on the top you have the left eye and on the bottom you have the sphere for the right eye. And as you just when you are watching VR video, each eye captures only 1/4 of the sphere of this 2K image. So the actual resolution comes down to HD image, and equirectangular deformation doesn't help with the quality of the image, as it needs to be transformed back to be seen as a sphere. So knowing that, we have to come up with new concepts about having well-known works presented in a way that is adapted to those traits of this technology. For example, if you are thinking about position of a 360 camera, what would you consider to be a best spot in a classical music concert? Perhaps placing the camera in the auditorium is not the greatest idea, because the camera is limited to the 4-meter sharp image. So such experience can be quite disappointing for the viewers comparing to the real thing. But if you think about putting camera on stage, closer to the band, where should it be? In the place of the conductor? It is if it is live recording, you cannot do that, because you cannot obstruct the view of the conductor for the orchestra. And so to overcome these limitations, I came up with an idea of super spectator position. So this is not an uniform position for every production, but it is a spot where you cannot sit as an audience member in a real life, and it's much closer to the action. And what type of super spectator you can use is determined by the type of the production you are doing. So when we are talking about immersive music documentaries, usually you cannot use microphone. You can use microphones on the set, and they can be visible. Then they can be recorded in the image, but they cannot obstruct the view for the audience, especially if the event is live. So you can use the stage miking. Usually the recorded material is taken from single spot, and if you are doing 2 spots or 3, the transitions may be on demand in the projection app, not in this edited video. And mostly the productions that I done were live events with audience, so there was always audience listening to the concert, and that was before the pandemic outbreak. And I believe that this type of creations will be demanded if the situation won't change in the if with the music concerts. And this is a frame. This is a frame from a typical music concert setup. As you can see, there are. This is equi-rectangular view. So everything that is behind is on the left and on the right side of the image, and things that are in front of you are in the middle. So you can look at it as it is a map in the geographic atlas. And as you can see, the camera is not in the line with the singer. It's a little bit on the side, on his right, and it is aligned with the edge of the stage. So we are standing with our left arm to the audience and right arm to the band. And microphones, every musician has a spot microphone. So we have 4 position mic'd, and there is also ambisonic microphone here where are the stands, not in the same position as camera, because some of the VR cameras tend to use fans as a cooler, so they produce noise. So I'm using separation about 1 or 2 meters from the camera to overcome this problem. And if you will imagine how this sound will be positioned regarding the image. So this is a typical case when you can use the ventriloquist effect, because if you will align the sound with the singer, you will probably have the spatial image of the other musicians, maybe not bassonist who is on the right, but the oboe and the positive organ will be probably in their place in the respect of your perception. So what is the difference between the immersive music documentaries and VR experiences with diegetic music? So these are treated more like typical feature films. So microphones usually cannot be visible unless the scene is designed to have such microphones. And POV transitions, so the transitions between the takes, are dictated by the script and the director. What I am talking about this is very important when you are planning your registration, because, for example, imagine a music scene where is a music played by the orchestra, and you need to make transition from one spot to other. If you would do that during the orchestra playing their phrase, you will have different perspective in the other spots. So there will be some type of strange transition. You can use the musical phrases to find spots that will be more likely to adapt to these situations. And recorded, these experiences usually are recorded in multiple takes with option of using playback, but not always. I will show you in next slide a case where it was impossible. But using playback in VR for music is also, it also has a risk, because VR is very sensitive to some not well played by actors music instruments. So there is a need to have many rehearsals to have the image synced with the playback music. So in many cases, recording on set is more likely to work than the playback. And the venues of the sets might have random acoustics, so this is another problem to overcome. For example, you would need to have very close miking and use the spot miking as an audio objects and not ambisonic microphones. And the sets might be noisy because you have lights, you have power generators, propellers, people talking. So this is another problem that you need to be aware of. So this is an image on this slide from a feature film about Fryderyk Chopin that I'm working right now on. And there are two musical scenes. One is where the musician is, we are the musician and we are playing on the piano. So this is POV. These are our hands on the right side. So as you can see, there was a lot of equipment needed on the set to record this, and we needed to hide it. So on the right, the piano is already mic'd, and you don't see any microphones. There are three microphones, three stereo microphone sets here hidden. One is Earthworks piano mic behind this bar over the piano hammers. It is hidden. And there are also boundary layer microphones tapped to the piano hatch, and also large diaphragm microphones hidden behind the piano, capturing audio from the reflection from the hatch. So on the next image, you will see me tapping the boundary layers to the hatch with a very thin wire. So it was invisible for the camera from the perspective of the pianist. And what's important, when you have such, I will go back to the previous slide for a second. If you have such perspective, that you are close to the piano in VR, you need to remember that the spatial position of the sounds from the left side of the piano, which are the lower sounds, and the right side, which are the high sounds, is important. So you have to record in a manner that you will receive possibility to position those sounds in a way that this will work like a real piano. Okay, so this is another image of the piano miking. Here is my colleague hidden under the piano during the rolling of the scene, and you can see the microphone stand laying under the piano. This is where the large diaphragm microphones were positioned. And another one was behind the pianist. So behind the pianist, we had an ambisonic microphone, which was capturing the overall atmosphere of the overall atmosphere of the scene. So it is important to have in mind that having those different types of microphones, and there were also microphones that were capturing the talk of the speaking of the actors. So it is important to have separate monitoring positions. So my friend was monitoring the spot mics, and I was more like directing overall scene with the monitoring of the binaural monitoring of the ambisonic mic.
Hey, Przemek, I'm sorry for interrupting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to
Yes.
just do a quick reset of the space. The audio was great, at least for me here in the mirrored room for some time, but just it started to get garbly. So just stand by. If you can just hold on, I'm gonna reset the space here for everybody. I don't know if that affects only this room or.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound great. Go ahead and continue.
Okay.
Make sure that you use your host tools to go on air and also to amplify my voice. And then you're free to continue.
Yes, it's on.
Awesome.
Okay, so I'm continuing.
Yeah, it sounds much
Okay,
better. Thank you so much. Sorry for the interrupt.
So when you are thinking about recording music for VR, you have to have in mind that the big part of the spatial mixing is done with the positioning of the musicians and the set, and because once you capture the sound field, it is difficult to change the arrangement. Of course, you can use object sound and try to reconstruct the scene, but usually you would like to have well done spatially recording. So the positioning and the walking through the script and talking with scenographers, with the people from the film crew, it is important to have this set before you start and record. And you need to use the rehearsals to plan that and direct. So actually you have to be a really, really tough sound director, and you have to fight for your sound on the set. And people tend to forget those planned arrangements, so you need to beat their guide. And for that you will probably need some help from assistant that will, for example, manage technical issues for you, and you can concentrate on directing people and the crew. And monitoring is the key to success. So I said that I'm using the ambisonic microphone monitoring because it captures everything that is happening. So I can hear not only the music sounds, but also all the noises and unwanted sounds that are on the set. So, but it might be tricky. And recently, when I was working, I was using different kinds of plugins to test the recordings, and it occurred to me that even if those HRTFs that are declared to be the same in those plugins can be different. So for example, I tested DirVR YouTube profile versus the Google Resonance original HRTF profile. And what it occurred that the DirVR profile is about 5 dB louder than the original one, and they are a bit different in the frequency response. So you can calibrate that, and I recommend using the original ones when you are preparing your material for a platform. So use, for example, Facebook HRTFs for Facebook. So you use the Facebook Spatial Workstation. And for testing the volumes, I really like the Audio 360 from the meter from the Facebook Spatial Workstation, because it measures the loudness in the loudness direction. So you have already tested all the directions. If you would binauralize by yourself and measure after binauralization, you would measure only the direction you are looking at. And this plugin tells you what is the loudest in any direction. So the recommendation for the loudness for mixing music and any material for VR is aligned with the AES recommendation for the streaming. So the optimal is -18 LUEFs and -1 dB true peak. So this is how you can be sure that your loudness will be readable. And now I wanted to show you an example, first example of my registration. This is a trailer from a concert that I was making a documentary about it. And you will hear someone talking there. These are the texts from speaking from the musicians, but it's in Polish. I didn't translate it. No captions, but the music is important. So now I will show you that. and we will continue.
Przestrzenią dla dźwięku, który produkuję, który gram, to jest dana sytuacja, dane miejsce, dani ludzie, dla których gram. Tak patrzę na przestrzeń.
Przestrzeń i czas jest tym płótnem, na którym my, muzycy, malujemy swoje kompozycje.
Okay, so can you guys send emojis if someone, if you could hear the music and the sound, if it was playing okay? All right, so I have some infos that maybe someone didn't hear well, but I see that there are plenty of good reactions. No, some bad also. So maybe those guys who couldn't hear, maybe you can just reconnect to the alt space, and I will continue with the presentation. So this is awkward that in VR I have to show you pre-rendered capture from the VR headset on a flat screen. Normally I would show you just the 360 video and we would be all immersed in, but I hope that you could hear the spatial features of the sound. So this concert was quite difficult because first the sound system was reinforcing the sounds of the music instruments, and for a video side it was also difficult because there were constantly changing lights and there were noise, but it was really a heavy task for the camera. And as you can see, there were 3 musicians on the stage, and we had pianist who played on 2 pianos and 2 synths. We had a person who played on live electronics and a percussionist who was walking in between different instruments. And I was wondering where should the camera stand, and as you could see, the choice was on the back behind the band, and I chose those 2 musicians, not the pianist. The pianist is the most known one from them, but he was a guest musician in this group. So I tried to focus on those 2 main musicians, and the percussion set was the most dynamic one of them. So during the concert, Miłosz, the percussionist, was walking, and it was really interesting. So for the sound-wise side, the percussion instruments also were most interesting. So this is why I placed the camera, and the sound was from this spot. And if you could hear in this scene, the percussion is the spatially driving the whole scene. So you have this anchor in the percussion set. So when you're looking right and left, you always are knowing where you are in this scene because of the percussions. Yes, this is the percussionist, and he also played in some parts on a tone generator, as you can see in the back on the right, Briol and Kerr generator from the old days. So as you can see, the lights were really very changing during the concert. So what microphones techniques I now I recommend using for doing such documentaries and feature films? So first you can use, of course, ambisonic microphones. This is the first thing that you come with, because they are giving you the full sphere. But why not only ambisonic microphones? I really am a big fan of those microphones, but I think that this technology still is not there in the with the quality of the sound that I would like to have, I would like to achieve. So this phonographic quality that comes from the stereo recordings is not quite there yet. But actually, using ambisonic microphones is quite cost effective, because with one microphone you can capture really good sound image. So the second technique is to use spot microphones, but spot microphones for this kind of usage need to be really close to the instrument, so you can get the most anechoic sound from the instrument, and then you can use it to auralize the sound. And the third approach, so the spot microphones you can use as an audio objects afterwards, and the third method is to use spaced arrays of microphones. That is, for example, SMA3D, recommended by Hyunkuk Lee, and it works really perfectly. I will show you one on a photo in a while. But this is the least cost-effective method, because if you want to have a nice array, you need to use high-quality microphones, which are expensive. And for example, for this array, you need 8 of them, and preamps, etc. So this is the least cost-effective, but the quality of the sound is really nice. And those microphones are not for everything. Ambisonic microphones is most versatile in this scenario, because you can use ambisonic microphone as a atmospheric microphone, and also you can use virtual mics as an object. So you can use an ambisonic recording in many ways. And with spot microphones, you won't get very good envelopment. You can get great directivity, but the envelopment will be reconstructed with algorithms. So it usually is not sounding as well as the spatial image, on not only spatial but acoustic image, like in spaced areas. And what I found is that these three approaches are like sound field approach, object approach, and multi-channel approach for recording, and you can incorporate all of those into the music VR productions. This is a funny looking setup that I was using for one concert. So this is Insta360 Pro camera and 2 ambisonic microphones. I was comparing the qualities of the recordings. And on the next slide. No, this way. I wanted to show you the next recording, which will show you the different approach. Okay, so I've seen that some of you couldn't hear the sound or see the video, but I've heard that you can watch it afterwards on the YouTube stream. So this was a video where I tried a different approach. On the first video you could see I was using in general more the sound field recording than the discrete microphones. And in this recording I used sound field microphone to capture a spatial image and use this image to reconstruct the acoustics, but using objects from the spot mics. So I think that the small band and the chamber music was more adequate to conduct these tests. And I was really happy with the quality of the sound that I achieved with this method. Here you have a nice setup of Zilia microphone connected to the camera. They look like one piece of equipment. And I just wanted to show you that this camera is the optimal one for making music recordings because it doesn't have a fan as a cooler. It has radiators, so it gets warm. It gets sometimes really warm, but it doesn't produce any noise. And this is the ESMA 3D array that I was talking about. So you have 4 cardioid microphones that are positioned in the corners of a square. The square is has the spacing between microphones is 50 centimeters, and the upward pointing microphones are the hypercardioids to capture the reflections from the ceiling. This photo was taken in a studio, but I usually don't use it so close to the ceiling, so it was used more in this environment. As you can see, it is right next to the piano. In general, it should be moved more towards the auditorium, but I didn't have such option because this was a scene in a feature film, the second music scene in the feature film about Chopin. So after those experiments, I have proposed such method that for close distance sounds, I will use spot microphones and objects because of their nice sound and good directivity and the control over the directivity. And for the more spaced sounds, the more generalized sound, I will use the sounds from the ambisonic microphone and from the ESMA 3D array. So this is an image of the positions of the microphones in this scene. You cannot see the ambisonic microphone because it is directly near the, I guess, below the camera. And you can see the position of the spot mics. And I wasn't miking whole orchestra because the microphone for the whole orchestra was the array that is above. And what I needed was the directivity of the closest musicians around me. And I think that I achieved a quite nice effect on that. And I want to present it to you. Out of time. This is something that I was talking about, the camera vision, but it also may apply to the sound. So if you would consider using this 4 meters ring as an area where the object sound works best because you don't need so so much envelopment, but you need very the directivity. And as you go further, you could use those types of arrays of microphones or sound field microphones. High order sound field microphones will also work in the close area, but you can also use this lower order sound field microphones for those next circles. I will move on. So general recommendations are that you could have in mind of the areas of the spatial perception and consider lower ambisonics, for example, for more generalized directivity if needed. And I wasn't talking about 180 degree video, so I will skip that. And so think about this super spectator, this position of camera, which is something that will need to adapt to the scene that you are taking, and use the directivity anchors in close distance, as in the last example I showed you. The violins, the first violins that were the closest to the camera, were such an anchor, so you could always know where they are, so everything is aligned to them. And for spot microphones, are you going to be using these sounds as a spot signals, as an object sounds, you would need to capture them as dry, as little reverberate as possible, because spatialized reverb is recorded reverb is not what you want. So remember about calibrating the HRTFs, because they tend to be different, or just use the original ones from the broadcasters. And what's the golden rule? For the question asking the subject, you need to find the balance for the thing that you are capturing, because there is no golden rule at all. It's a rather matter of your taste and the needs of the audience. Thank you for your attention. And if you would like to contact me, just catch me in the outspace or in the internets, or live, hopefully. Thank you very much.
We have time for one or two questions if you want to take them, Chairman.
Yeah, of course. Of course. If there are questions, please just ask me.
So for anyone who's new here, there's a new button, bottom right, for you to raise your hand. If you're interested in asking a question, go ahead and hit that button and I'll let you know when it's your turn. Thomas, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
So,
I can hear.
Two little questions. So one is that normally you cut visuals at different scenes, but if you want to follow the audio, follow the visual, you have breaks in your audio. So you should move from one scene to another. That is what I've learned.
Yeah.
And the other question is, if you mix the ambisonic arrays and spot microphones, do you run into phase problems when you mix all that stuff?
Yeah, well, regarding the phase issues, if you use objective sounds in a close field, and especially with the human voice, you will get artifacts if you will use high order ambisonics, but low order ambisonics with the object sound will blend better. So you can lower the ambisonic order and use this sound field as a more ambient sound.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Colin, go ahead, you're up next. Colin, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Sorry about that. I was just curious what your tactic is to sync the USB microphones with the analog microphones.
Yes. How did I do it? Is the question. Well, I was using different recorders for that. So I sync that in post-production and not during the recording. Does it answer your question? If you're asking about using timecode or something like that, no, I haven't used timecode. I was just thinking in a manual manner with the using the spectrum of the sound.
All right. Leslie, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here, and I would just like to say I have no idea how I raised my hand by accident. So, everybody enjoy the conference. I'm going to put myself back on mute. Love, love.
Thank you very much.
We should probably wrap up. We got to get a chance to change over for the next piece.
Okay. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you in a year with my next experiences. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? More hearts.
Yes.
Cool. Wonderful. All right. Just while we get a changeover of speakers happening, I'll give Aaron a quick little introduction. Aaron, do you want to pop up to the stage? Nice. Okay, so here we have Aaron Bergson. The title of Aaron's presentation is The Past, Present, and Future of Immersive Music. And he'll be presenting a survey of key developments from Gabriele to virtual reality. And it looks like there's going to be a lot that we'll learn in the next hour. So what I'll do is, Aaron, do you want to do like a really quick little test of just, can people hear you, and collect a few like emojis before you get rolling?
Sure. I have put myself on air and I've amplified my voice, and now I'm talking, and now I'm doing jazz hands. So you
Great.
can hear me talking and see the jazz hands.
Okay, and we'll just take a couple of minutes to switch over the slide deck for you. So we'll do that, and we'll get rolling at exactly 12:30.
Great. Just trying to place this floating slideshow in a way that I can navigate it. Okay. Oh, and now I had to re-click that I was on air. And
You able to control your
Yeah.
slides okay?
yeah, I can. Well, you tell me. I'm gonna go from the first to the second slide. Did that work?
Yep.
Okay,
I'm seeing it.
great.
Great, so you're
Right.
all ready to go?
All right, and everybody can still hear me okay after the reboot of the thing? I got some thumbs up, and my hands are doing things. Great. So I guess I'll get started.
Take it away.
You might stand to your left behind the podium. Yeah, I was Lawrence, I was thinking of using my hands a bit, and I don't know if that would be occluded in the in this. And I've now placed the browser kind of right here, so if it's okay to hang out here, I might stay here. Cool. All right. So welcome to this workshop, everyone. My name is Aaron Berkson. What I'm presenting is research that I've been doing for a paper that I'm working on, and the title of the paper is The Past, Present, and Future of Immersive Music, a survey of key developments from Gabrielli to virtual reality. And kind of in the spirit of contextual inquiry, I reached out to and interviewed one-on-one leading creatives from both feature film and interactive entertainment. And so, as the title says, we'll take a look at some interesting examples from the past, not exhaustive list, interesting contemporary examples, and look at kind of future possibilities of immersive music. And during the Q&A portion, I'm particularly fascinated to hear what people attending the conference have to say about it, and if there's additional kinds of creative context and technology context that arise from what I present. I'm all ears. And also feel free to find me on LinkedIn or at my website, aaronberkson.com, if you want to take the conversation outside the context of this this hour-long workshop that we have. So, I was really honored to have a lot of these heavy hitters take the time and deep dive with me into these topics, sometimes for multiple hours, both from a creative process perspective and from a kind of technical application perspective. And so those creatives on the feature film side included John Powell, who wrote the score for the Bourne Identity trilogy, How to Train Your Dragon, Mel Wesson, job title ambient music designer, who's a longtime collaborator of Hans Zimmer and worked on films such as the Dark Knight trilogy and Inception. Oscar-winning composer Stephen Price, who won the Oscar for Gravity. Alex Gibson, who's a music editor who won the Oscar for Dunkirk. Composer Lorne Balfe, and particularly the gamers tuning into this talk might know his interactive entertainment scores for the Assassin's Creed franchise as well as FIFA, and he did the most recent Mission Impossible film and his Dark Materials, the episodic HBO series. And I spoke with Jeff Foster, who's the chief recording and mix engineer at Air Studios in London. And if you look up Jeff Foster's IMDb list, it's a mind-boggling list of top films over the years, including Love Actually and the Dark Knight trilogy and Interstellar. So in the interactive field, I spoke with Kevin Bolin at Skywalker Sound, and game composers Will Roget and Chris Velasco. And in common with all three of them, we talked, at length about Vader Immortal, a Star Wars VR series, and kind of the creative and technical approach to both the overall sonic palette as well as the music specifically. And I also spoke with Michael Bross at Facebook's Oculus, sound designer Andy Martin, who also worked on Vader Immortal and also has worked on many of the Oculus experiences, and VR entrepreneur Brooks Brown, who has a music-centric VR startup that just recently signed a agreement with Oculus. So just a little bit about me, so you understand where I'm coming from. I have both a background in technology and in music. My undergrad was in computer science from Carnegie Mellon, and music-wise, I got a certificate from the Juilliard, and recently got a master's in composition for screen from the Royal College of Music in London. And I've also worked extensively as a user experience designer, and kind of within that capacity at Bloomberg, I also spearheaded the sonification of the Bloomberg terminal, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the leading ecosystem for digital ecosystem for financial services. And then also on the music side, I was a jazz genre winner in the John Lennon Songwriting Contest, and recently was chosen as part of the 2020 ASCAP Composer Spotlight associated with Columbia University. So the question is, what is immersive music? What do I mean by this question? And it's really within the context of emerging immersive technologies, both visually and sonically, like Dolby Atmos, like ambisonics, like many of the other technologies that are being discussed at this conference. And the question I'm investigating is, what possibilities do these platforms open up for immersive music? So David Byrne, one of the principals from the Talking Heads, he said the same music placed in a different context can not only change the way the listener perceives that music, but it can also cause the music itself to take on an entirely new meaning. So I'm looking at kind of different contexts, historically, contemporary, and thinking about context in the future of how these new standards and immersive technologies might be used by composers. So we can start with the past. And even though you could argue immersive music has been around since cave paintings, we'll start with Gabrielli in Venice in the 1500s, who made use of the two choir lofts in St. Mark's Basilica, if any of you have visited the location in Venice. And it has a kind of unique architecture with these two opposing choir lofts above the congregation. And because of that unique architecture in that space, kind of gave rise to these masterpieces of stereophonic, antiphonal, polychoral music. And in terms of kind of where Gabrielli's historically placed, he's considered a key transitional figure from the Renaissance to the Baroque era. And if you consider music notation as part of the history of music technology, in his music we have the very first example of the written dynamics, forte and piano, in 1597. One of his peers, Delassus, who wrote also kind of complex polychoral music in what's called the Franco-Flemish style, he wrote a work called The Tears of St. Peter towards the end of his life. And the LA Master Chorale, as recently as early 2020, had it in their repertoire, but a kind of contemporary reimagining of it. And Peter Sellers, who's the director of the LA Master Chorale, he described that piece as like the B minor Mass of Bach, the last work of a great master. He already knows he's not writing for anyone in his lifetime to hear. He's writing music for future generations. Now, if we fast forward somewhat in time into the 1800s, there's big requiem concert works by both Verdi and Berlioz that make use of brass instruments or entire brass sections placed dimensionally around the stage or around the auditorium. In the case of Verdi, it's offstage trumpets. In the case of Berlioz, he wrote this piece, this requiem, with aspirationally 800 voices in mind. And it premiered with over 400 performers. It had 3 choirs and 4 brass ensembles placed in the corner of the stage. And often when this piece is put on, they place 4 brass ensembles in the corner of the auditorium. In the 20th century, Stockhausen, electroacoustic pioneer, his piece Gruppen was written for 3 orchestras and 3 conductors surrounding the audience. And during a recent performance at the Tate Modern, the conductor, Sir Simon Rattle, commented that it was as much an installation as a composition. Another example that's interesting to look at is early Disney work, and particularly Steamboat Willie and Fantasia. And if we look at Steamboat Willie today, a lot of it seems, it has a lot of things that we take for granted these days as an audience, but at the time it was a breakthrough. In fact, Walt Disney and his company went broke attempting to record the orchestra to get it synced with the picture, and then had to take out a loan in order to re-record the whole thing. And the recording was actually done in New York City, and he wrote a wire to his brother Roy in California saying, "Get as large a loan as possible. Our future depends on first picture, therefore am not sparing expense to make it good." And it was a huge hit, obviously. And when he was envisioning Fantasound, the first surround sound system, he said it would be quite a sensation if you get that dimensional thing on the screen and have the horns working with it. The sound and the pictures will be around you. So we can take a look at my conversation with John Powell. When it comes to spatialization, John writes his melodic layers primarily in stereo because it's going to be re-recorded with an orchestra and recorded in surround during the actual performance, whereas his percussive layers he will actually start in surround sound. And that's because he is recording, he's writing using his own personal percussion library that he's recorded in surround. And often the nature of the percussion parts that he writes are basically impossible to perform with live percussionists. And on Atmos, he's been working with Atmos recently. He talked about one particular situation in Call of the Wild where they recorded 12 guitarists simultaneously in an arc in the studio that he thought really benefited from what he describes as Atmos mics, which are mics placed kind of in addition to the multitude of mics that you'd set up for a normal orchestral recording, but placed in approximately the same locations that the Atmos speakers exist in the cinema. And, when he talked about future inspiration, he talked about Delassus and the Tears of St. Peter, and a particular performance he went to in Montreal, and he described it as the most extraordinary immersive musical experience of his life, and that he could visually almost see the lines moving. So he described that as immersive music at its best. And it's not sort of typed out on the slide here, but another theme he kept on coming back to in our conversation, which is a kind of ongoing theme with particularly the feature film people that I spoke with, is the notion of story. And if to paraphrase a game designer Will Wright, the context in film is typically centered around empathy. So in the story, you feel empathy for the characters. And the context in games and interactive media is centered around agency, what you do. And so the feelings often that come out of that between film and games are different. Because if you're empathizing with characters, you don't feel pride about what you accomplished in a game, for instance. And he's also working on new concert works and talking about this kind of highly dimensional music as something that would be a great thing to try and achieve, and something he's been thinking about. And he said with all the new technology, he said we as composers, content creators, storytellers need to be careful, to not get overly enamored with the literal immersion of the technology and not forget about the immersion of the soul. And he also commented that immersion is a good word to describe a story that's being well told. And maybe I can get to the next slide. Yes. So that relates to my conversation with Stephen Price, who also emphasized that the opportunities for immersive music are led by the story. So in the case of Gravity, the visuals were already suggesting an immersive experience. So it made no sense for the music to come conventionally from the front of the theater. And the director, Alfonso Cuarón, would often say, we must free ourselves from the tyranny of the center speaker. And so as Stephen Price was writing the score, he would ask himself, not only how am I going to use a given bit of music, but where am I going to use a given bit of music? And we talked about this particular scene in Gravity, which you may recall, where Sandra Bullock's character and George Clooney's character kind of tumbling out of space, out of control in opposite directions. And what he did for the score in that case was compose two different melodic lines that, could musically coexist with each other. And one of those melodic lines mapped to Sandra Bullock's character, and the other melodic line mapped to Clooney's character. And then in the mix, they spatially tied those melodic lines that were recorded with live string players and separately. And they tied them spatially in the mix. So spatially, those lines are actually moving with the characters, tumbling through space. And he did that in a lot of cases, that kind of thing in a lot of cases in Gravity. So he said you were always painting the picture in 3D, and the music grew out of that. Another thing he mentioned was one of the things he learnt in the process of doing Gravity was that some sounds spatialize better than others. And he found that the more sharp-edged, high-frequency sounds with a little bit of bite to them, with a little percussive edge, those are the things that your brain would register moving around the space in the cinema. And they were, very excited about the roof speakers in Atmos, and Gravity was one of the very first kind of major feature films to be mixed in Atmos. And when they went in the theater and tested some of the sounds they were excited to put in the roof, they realized that they didn't register as being above you at all. It just sounded like it's everywhere. It's just in stereo. So through that process, they were experimenting with, what Atmos could give them compositionally, kind of what material would work, and also how the brain would process the sounds in the context of the story. And he's done kind of analogous approaches for some of his other films and television shows like Our Planet for Netflix and Baby Driver. Baby Driver is very focused around songs, and the main character, Baby Driver, suffers from tinnitus and puts headphones in his ears and blasts pop songs to drown out the tinnitus. And the tinnitus in that film is actually musical. It was recorded by string players, and it's pitched with the intent of fusing into the pop song that comes after it or that it precedes. He also kept coming back to story, and he's quite interested in VR. He had an interesting perspective, which he said is that every time he tries out a VR experience, his reaction was, this is going to be huge, but it's not there yet. And that he feels like there still has to be the VR equivalent of the moving train film from the silent era that everyone on the planet feels like they need to see. And that after that, the adoption will just blow wide open. And he said the thing that's going to do that is a brilliant story. So I spoke with Mel Wesson, a longtime collaborator of Hans Zimmer. And this concept of ambient music design is a title that Hans and Mel came up with. And he describes it as where the music begins to end and the sound design begins to start, and there's that crossover world. And on multiple Chris Nolan movies he's worked on with Hans Zimmer, Chris Nolan would refer to his work as melaments, and they'd be looking at a scene, and Nolan would ask, do we have any melaments for this? And one of the most famous melaments are the bat flaps from the Dark Knight trilogy. And those are also music, essentially, but realized as figurative sound within the world of the story. They're composed of found sounds and a lot of analog synthesizers. And in the later films, they have orchestral elements added into the bat flaps themselves, as opposed to things that most people would perceive as orchestral. And they were not created to picture initially. They were created out of conversations about the concept with the director, and the concept was to create an immediate presence for Batman, whether he was on screen or not. And in the case of the bat flaps, and in general, Mel likes to, with a particular sound, work with it in a particular tempo. And the bat flaps were fixed to 130 BPM, but there were elements and layers of it that were half time, single time, double time, to create the impression of several different tempos, even though it's actually tempo locked. Another example we discussed was Inception, and a kind of prevalent ambience used throughout the film, sometimes kind of nearly alone, and at other times beefing up the musical score, was created by blasting the brass stem out of speakers through the top of a grand piano with microphones underneath the grand piano to pick up the sympathy to the harmonics, the brass. And he was saying that ambience and other experiments like that gave the film a unique character, a unique world of ambience. And he said, I think that was my favorite of all of them. And Mel was kind enough to share these screenshots. And the idea is not to deconstruct these in detail, but to kind of show some of his creative and technical approach. The two directory listings on the left are from the Dark Knight trilogy. And the first one is the very, very first early demo, as he described it, the birth of the bat flaps. So those are all the layers that just went into the earliest demo phase when they were starting to experiment with putting it to picture. And the second one is for the Bane character from the third film. The center image is a logic session for the ambient material in the beginning of the Da Vinci Code. And the image on the right is from Metasynth, which is one of the tools that Mel likes to use. And Metasynth has a lot of different features to it, but one of them is you can generate sounds from images. So he's taking Anthony Hopkins' scary Hannibal Lecter face and using that as a kind of starting point to generate sounds. Now, on Mel's recommendation, I spoke with Alex Gibson, who he described as the best music editor on the planet, and so much more. And Alex described Chris Nolan as being unique as never using music, so that he always has his composer create the music way in advance while they're shooting or even before. And in terms of his kind of creative editing approach, Alex will typically start with ambient material and percussion material, often the kind of thing that Mel comes up with. And that is what he shapes around the pacing and story context of the scenes. And then after that, he'll start to bring in the motivic material, the tune. So, in a sense, a lot of what Alex is contributing would be traditionally thought of as composition, because he'll often meld 4 different cues together that, when the composition team put them together, weren't necessarily intended for that exact scene, and fuses them in a way that feels right. And then after he has this giant stack of layers, he'll start to subtract particular layers to clarify the statement. And that's when he says you can play it loud and proud. When it comes to the kind of the spatial image of the music, most of the directors Alex said that he's worked with basically like to keep the orchestra static, as though you're in a concert hall. He did remark that some of the recent Transformers movies, which they mixed in Atmos, they put the choir actually above the screen in the theater, which coincides with Gabrielli's choir music above your head. And he also talked about inception, a process that they would refer to as worldizing, and that the previous Mel Wesson anecdote with the brass through the piano is one example of that. But Chris Nolan was really into the idea, and they'd play reflections of the music outdoors and in all kinds of different spaces, and then they'd use that worldized layer and bring it back into the score. And he said that the smaller and more intimate the cue, the more likely it would be to be worldized. And there was worldizing in the Dark Knight trilogy and other Chris Nolan films, but the big one was Inception. So Alex kindly shared these screenshots of Pro Tools sessions. And again, the idea is not really to deconstruct them, but to just kind of show the sheer complexity of just the music cues alone in some of these spectacle films. And the first one is Transformers on the left, the middle one is The Dark Knight Rises, and the one on the right is Interstellar. So I spoke with Lauren Balfe, who did Assassin's Creed, Mission Impossible. We spoke especially about his Dark Materials, which is an episodic HBO series based on the Philip Pullman novels. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a kind of Narnia-like universe, except different. And he talked about the challenge of writing a memorable theme that is just as symbolic and memorable as the actual actors, and also the challenge of getting all the approval that you need to get in television with kind of multiple decision makers. When it comes to the spatial image of the music, Lorne says he thinks about the orchestra as quite a static environmental setup. But when he duplicates the orchestra with synths, which he often does in kind of big action movies, he'll move the synths around in the mix, panning, positioning, etc., to bring life to it. So he says what that achieves is to create flow and movement that the orchestra doesn't necessarily have. And one example of that is the main theme to his Dark Materials, which you can find, the opening credits, where it was originally written for an electric cello, an acoustic cello, but then they switched to record it with an electric cello, and then they treated the electric cello as though it were a synth and put it through gates and filters and all sorts of manipulations to add interest to it. And there was another example from Gemini Man with Will Smith, where he took the brass textures, the brass chords, and pitched them down an octave, into a frequency range that those instruments can't actually play in. And then that became a kind of texture underneath the real performance. And he said what that accomplished was filling up the space in cinema to help it punch through. And Lorne recommended that I speak with Jeff Foster, who's the chief engineer at Air Studios. And if you're not familiar with Air Studios, it's this amazing recording space in London built in an old church that has a hexagonal shape, and there's a picture there on the slide. And it was converted into a recording studio in the 1970s by Beatles producer George Martin, and a lot of major film scores get recorded there. And when it comes to his philosophy of the spatial, the panning image of music, he says that the general rule he has is that it has to be not distracting. And in fact, in order to make the music immersive, the immersive element of it requires that it not be distracting. He also talked about the orchestral image, and if the ultra traditional layout of the orchestra, maybe I can show it to you on this stage, is violin ones around here, violin twos around here. You got violas, cello, and contrabass, essentially. So you're basically going from the high end to the low end, from the left to the right, from the audience's perspective. And to him, the traditional layout of the orchestra was done for the ease of conducting more than anything else, but for the perspective of film, it's distracting. Because essentially you've got the melodies way over on the right and the low end way over on the left. So what he prefers to do is to have the orchestra laid out with first violins from the audience perspective on the left and the second violins on the right, and then kind of violas and cello in the kind of middle left and right, and bass bang in the middle. So he says effectively that makes the orchestra a big, fat, washy pad. There are, kind of exceptions or expansions of that idea. And one example is, once again, the Dark Knight trilogy. And if you're familiar with that movie and the main Batman theme, it's essentially two notes, or two giant chords with a lot of dynamic changes in them. But that two-note motif is realized spatially, moving from mainly on the left to moving mainly on the right. And not entirely unlike Gabrielli, they put two brass choirs in the gallery, so above the main floor. And that's, anytime you hear that huge bombastic Batman theme in those films, that's the spatial movement that's occurring. But he added that it's never used anywhere where it would distract, right? It's Mel Wesson also referred to it as Batman looking Batman-ish. And so it's a fanfare for the moments where you're looking for a fanfare. So in general, he says it's a very fine line to tread. It's a balancing act between making the audience feel like they're enveloped in the music, but kind of unaware that they're enveloped in the music. And he said his considered opinion on immersive sound is that you have to be very, very careful to do it well. Now, I almost feel like I have to apologize for this slide with this audience, but for a more general audience that might be looking at it on YouTube or people with a more kind of musical training background, I'll just blaze through these really quickly. There's head-related transfer functions, which you can kind of think of as acoustic head shadow, because your head blocks sound coming from one direction, and then your ears and your brain with pitch discrepancies and phase discrepancies calculates the direction. HRTF personalization and synthesis are ways of kind of simulating that with software, essentially. And binaural recording is a way of capturing things with a HRTF-like information in it, and binaural rendering, again, is a kind of algorithm to represent that. And ambisonics is a spherical sound field technology that's not channel-based, but point-based. And the more points that are represented on the sphere, the higher the order is: first order, second order, third order. And it can be understood as a three-dimensional extension of mid-side, developed in the 1930s. Ambisonics was developed in the 1970s, but has really only found more widespread commercial adoption now, and there's multiple fascinating work being presented at this conference for almost every one of these words. So we can, can't seem to get to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So we can take a look at these interactive examples where, even though in games the context is centered around agency, in the case of Vader Immortal, done by Disney/Lucasfilm/Skywalker Sound, the concept was to put the player inside of a Star Wars film to give you the idea that you're a character in the film. And so everything they did, including the music and the sound, was done from a film perspective first and a game's perspective second. And Kevin described, by removing a lot of the traditional constraints of storytelling, you give the player agency over how the narrative executes, how fast it executes, because in part the player becomes the director, the cinematographer, the boom operator, etc. And musically speaking, this still means a kind of distinction between kind of filmic linear cues or cutscene in a game, and more like gameplay loops that act dynamically. And so because it was kind of conceived of as this filmic experience, they tried to blend between those kinds of musical cues seamlessly. And one example is when you first meet Darth Vader in Episode 1. He enters, through a Star Wars door, and it's very moody, and he gives a little speech and asks you to do a task. And of course, the timing of that speech is fixed. And so that's more like a film cue. And then after it's up to you, the player, to complete the task, the task is the transition period between the linear cue and the gameplay cues. So I spoke with both of the composers for Vader Immortal, Will Roget and Chris Velasco, and they both said that they didn't really do anything differently compositionally because it was in VR versus a console Star Wars game. But Will Roget remarked that in VR you hear a little bit more detail than you normally do in the music, and particularly because the job at hand is to create John Williams-esque, heavily orchestral type of music. He was able to freely express a level of nuance with the orchestration, and those kind of really nuanced details in the orchestration kind of came through better in VR. And Chris Velasco, he's worked on several other VR titles, including The Invisible Hours, which is a kind of immersive theater piece. And he said that his opinion is normally VR doesn't need that much music. It inherently requires less music than a standard console game, unless it's Star Wars. And if you don't have wall-to-wall Star Wars music, it doesn't feel like Star Wars.
Aaron, we lost you. Let's give him a moment. Maybe he had to re-enter the space. Is everybody else still here? Can you guys see and hear me? I know I'm in cloned room 2, but those of you in here, yeah, okay. Maybe Aaron just must have had something on his end. Hopefully he'll materialize to the patio and re-enter the space in a moment. So, pretty cool presentation, huh? I'm really enjoying this one. So, okay. Folks, I'm so sorry we lost Aaron. He just disappeared. So welcome to the Bleeding Edge. Yeah, I'm sad too. Here, I'm definitely sad. I don't really have a backup plan for this. It is it's 1:07. So Sal, do you want to maybe just say a few words about what's happening next for the rest of the day and tomorrow, and then we can stick around and maybe hope that he does show up?
I think I just said I'm back.
Hello.
Oh, there he is! Yay! Oh, good.
Perfect timing.
I started talking about Star Wars and I disappeared like Obi-Wan Kenobi. So go on air, amplify my voice. Let's get this browser back.
Yay!
Settings. Oop, hang on. There we go. And let me see if I can see my slides. All right. So, it's about to talk about technical approaches. So Kevin Boland, we talked about technical approaches to spatialization in VR, and everybody can hear me and see me okay, right? Smileys? Okay, great. So the predominant approach at Skywalker Sound is emulating Dolby Atmos proscenium speakers via headlocked binaural audio renders. So in the Dolby Atmos format, there are these kind of closer left and right speakers and these, far left and right speakers that kind of correspond to a traditional theater proscenium. And what they'll do is, kind of in a binaural mix, place the music coming out of those speakers. However, unlike in a movie theater, they're headlocked. So these proscenium speakers kind of move with your head as you're playing the experience. And the idea is to clear narrative space in the middle for sound effects and dialogue. And then so hopefully you hear all the different stems more clearly the entire time. So they're, the music's outside of your head but locked to your head. And the general rule of thumb was to never spatialize a musical element front and center unless it was narratively important. So again, it's this kind of more cinematic approach to implementing the music. Now, one contrasting example is Myth, which is now available, which is in the world of Frozen. So it's Myth, a Frozen tale, and the spatial approach to the music in this was a bit different. I mean, sometimes they do the proscenium speaker thing, but at other times they'd make the music as if it was in your head, coming from headphones, and particularly during big, musical highlight moments, since Frozen's sort of a, Broadway musical / Disney movie. At other times, they would lock the music to the world. That would kind of establish a stage for where there might be narratively important information, and at other times, they would place instruments and melodic lines, not unlike Gravity, associated with characters. And it's also kind of an idea that you see in the masterpiece Peter and the Wolf. Different instruments represent different characters. So for Myth, they did a kind of 21st century 3D Mickey Mousing with the characters, musically speaking. When I asked Kevin about future trends, he emphasized the idea that spatial audio has the potential to become ubiquitous because of the sponsors of this conference, Valve and Facebook Reality Labs, and Google, creating tools for content creators so that everybody can create content with that's immersive, both visually and sonically. And in terms of what he'd like to see in the future, and I've already seen multiple talks that delve into this in a lot of detail, is the idea that you can customize spatial audio for a particular space that the user is in. So he said if he could put on a VR headset and it's got sensors in it, cameras, infrared sensors, etc., and it can make some assumptions about the space that he's in and customize the audio content. And there's also been a lot of discussion at this conference about HRTF personalization. Then he said you could have a scenario where, in one of these narrative interactive experiences, you feel as though that virtual character is really walking into your living room. So I also spoke with Michael Bross at Facebook's Oculus, and he wears a lot of hats at Facebook, kind of audio director, sound designer, composer. He wrote the music for a lot of what they refer to at Oculus as NUXes, or new user experiences, which are designed to make the player feel comfortable with the equipment and with virtual reality in general. And Oculus has a kind of a contrasting approach in general to Skywalker Sound, and that the tendency is to mix ambisonic world-locked music. So taking different stems in the music, whatever it might be, bass, synthesizer, percussion, and kind of placing it spatially around the room, usually with the kind of lower frequency things towards the middle. But what that means is as you move around the space, your perception of the music changes. It's world locked and not head locked. In the case of the Oculus logo intro, which was kind of inspired by the Disney logo intro, they recorded with a real full orchestra, and that is kind of mixed ambisonically, but to imitate a quad type of setup in the space that it takes place in. And if we look at First Contact, sound designer Andy Martin worked on the sonic personality of the robot, which is a very intentionally Wall-E-like character, and that came out of improvisations with a Eurorack synth. And so over time he came up with this kind of library of feelings and moods and words, and those were, and then working with the animators, that was kind of conformed to the movements of the robot. And so I spoke with my friend Brooks Brown, who's company Vervi, and you can get some. I don't know if you're picking up the nice New York City sirens in the distance, but his company Vervi is they just signed an agreement with Oculus, and the idea, their vision, is to allow users to create their own custom worlds by customizing how they listen to and experience music. And they're right now in the midst with various musical artists to create custom worlds and custom kind of worlds of experiences in VR around a particular artist's musical aesthetic. And broadly speaking, Brooks said philosophically, the more people are empowered, and the more you create systems that other people can create stories in, the more you are able to create something that is truly powerful and can help change people emotionally. So that brings us to the question, what is the future of immersive music? The blanket disclaimer being that it is impossible to predict the future. But we can think about this in four kind of general areas. One is advances in technology, and particularly with this audience, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. But there's going to be increased access to immersive audio tools, and perhaps in the future, more of those immersive audio tools will exist in the immersive space themselves. So, for instance, with Michael Bross in Nuxas at Oculus, he talked about the challenges of kind of mixing it outside of the immersive space, rendering it, putting it in, compiling, et cetera, and then checking the mix in the space, as opposed to just being in the space and trying to, tweak aspects of the different stems spatially. There are, of course, big advances coming on the visual side of immersive technology: social teleportation, hand tracking, reconstruction through photogrammetry, more lifelike avatars, based on your real physical appearance. And it was kind of an observation of Kevin Boland that if history's any guide, that probably the visual innovations will happen first, and then the audio innovations will kind of catch up to them. So from the perspective of content creators, there are going to be new opportunities in content creation, because VR, AR, XR, immersive experiences are a powerful tool for both empathy and agency, since you can literally walk in someone else's shoes. And I mean, a powerful example of that is a 360 film from last year called Traveling While Black. And so, content creators are going to be able to experiment with differing degrees, nuanced degrees of interactivity, things that are more linear, less linear, and also be able to experiment with concepts that were previously more about in-person experiences, things where you had to be there for the experience to be effective, as well as experimenting with concepts that are untethered from the real world. The anti-gravity feature of the DJ Marshmallow concert in Fortnite, for instance. And there's also a multitude of applications beyond entertainment. Data visualization, training, travel, personal fitness, medicine, defense, therapy. The list goes on and on. Microsoft is working with the U.S. military on HoloLens applications. And finally, and again, this might be self-evident given the venue that we're talking in, but there's a new awareness of the benefits of virtualization, not only as a kind of solitary escape for mega nerds, but as a powerful means for social interaction, education, professional collaboration, and storytelling. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to the talk, and I'm really eager to hear what you guys have to say about it.
Thank you, Aaron. My name's Noel Cross, and I'm from Microsoft, and I'm going to be facilitating the Q&A. This was an awesome talk. Can everybody hear me? Great. All right. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and direct your question to Aaron.
I'm also interested in just comments or, additional contexts that people have run into related ideas, whether it's creatively or in terms of new technology.
I don't see any hand raises yet. I do have a question for you, Aaron.
Yes.
What would you say is like an embodiment of the best experience you've experienced using spatial audio or immersive audio at this point? I know things are evolving and people are trying out different things, and this talk showed various different ways that people are exercising the technology. I'm just curious if you have a shining example of, somebody using the technology to the best extent that we know about today.
Yeah, well, let's see. In some ways, I tried to focus on some of them within the talk, whether it's some of these big Hollywood spectacle films or some interesting interactive examples. In terms of, kind of VR entertainment, there's several pretty interesting examples floating out there. One that I didn't talk about is Bjork created a full album where the album itself was kind of conceived of as a virtual reality experience, not just as an album. So, you can buy the album in and of itself, but you can also buy it as a VR experience. And it's essentially a kind of, you're kind of wandering around Iceland, and you can trigger basically some interactive music videos with kind of multiple clones of Bjork and other kind of surreal imagery surrounding you. There's one particular interesting example called, I believe it's called Chocolate, and it's kind of quite low interactivity. I'm not sure if there's a better word for it, but essentially you're seeing, it's kind of trippy looking, and there are these kind of pink cats floating around and dancing to a techno song, and you have your arms turn into these shooters, and you can kind of shoot into the air where these dancing floating cats are dancing to the music. So it's like an 80% passive experience, but with a little bit of interactivity. And that combination, I thought, was very effective. We just heard from the Valve team, and Half-Life Alyx is, spectacular. And I have the Valve Index. It was interesting going through that and playing it and just kind of experiencing some of the different decisions they made with sound and audio. Not in Half-Life Alyx, but there have been some kinds of shooter type games where the spatial audio, I feel like, is misleading, where the monster or whatnot sounds like it's whispering from behind me in my right ear, and then I check where they are in the game, and they're on the other side of a bridge or something like that. So sometimes it can be distracting. One comment that Kevin Bolin had, which I don't think I mentioned in the talk just now, was that often you can use music as instructions, as opposed to in a film. In a film, you might be commenting on the story or telling people how to feel, but in an interactive experience, instead of having a big text that says pick up the sword now, you can have music kind of insinuate the kind of thing that you're supposed to do and where you're supposed to do it. And if it's done, in both enough on the nose and subtly enough, it's as though the user is actually figuring it out for themselves, but they're actually kind of being pushed along in a particular direction. So it's, it's again kind of about context. And like Stephen Price talked about when he was checking out VR experiences, how he found, when filmic type of music is stuck into VR experiences, he thought that it felt corny all of a sudden. It felt much cornier in VR, much more heavy-handed than it would in a film, because you have that sense of presence, and psychologically you're more likely to have the reaction of like, well, where is this orchestra playing in the desert that I'm in, etc. So it's I mean, I also think about real world experiences that would be great to be able to represent more accurately or more evocatively in VR. I mean, particularly musical experiences, but there's certain performance spaces around the world. I've personally done some interesting kind of musical tourism in Andalusia in Spain, and there's kind of nothing like seeing, a flamenco performance in some of the spaces where the genre itself came into being. It's unparalleled. There's more questions in the queue.
Hey, Aaron.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got 3 questions for you queued up. So
Okay.
I'm gonna put Aaron on air. Or sorry, Andrew, you're on air. What's your question?
Perfect. Hi. This is
Hi.
Andrew from HTC.
How
Thought
you
it was
doing?
a really good talk, doing great. And I especially appreciated the through line, not through just immersive multi-channel formats as we understand them, but just back through blocking and staging of actual orchestra pits. And I guess my question is sort of related to the preservation of intent. So a lot of those pieces, like for example, the Berlioz piece was conceived with 800 people, busted down to 400, probably performed with much fewer these days. And then again, multi-channel big immersive cinema thing is probably only experienced in Dolby Atmos at most during its theatrical run, and then in the homes of extreme enthusiasts. So how do you preserve intent, do you think, as things are progressively moved down the technological chain, the way Varun talked about in the keynote, productizing across the largest possible user base?
Sort of preserving intent for works that weren't originally conceived in an immersive sort of a digital immersive representation. Is that what you're getting at, or something else?
Platforms, if you're mixing in a particularly media-rich way, like in Dolby Atmos, and then you're mixing down to 2-channel. I, for example, have never experienced the sort of overhead seeming thing on these things for which I missed the theatrical run, and I wonder how do you look forward to making sure that experience is preserved even in non-immersive formats?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and so I'm kind of a Beatle fanatic, and it's kind of interesting that with some of the more recent innovations in audio technology, some of the remixes, you hear stuff that was actually captured at the time that was never captured in the records people could buy at that time.
Right.
So in some cases, these things improve with enhanced technology. Stephen Price had a kind of interesting comment in that department, was that, and he likes to compose in 5.1 and mix in 7.1, but he knows, particularly like for a Netflix special, it's going to be folded down in a lot of home theaters. But he had the thought that if you have the intent of something that's very immersive, and then you listen to it in a not so immersive delivery format, there's still something of the original intent that comes through, even though it's clearly not the same. And he had an anecdote where he listened to Gravity on headphone. He saw Gravity was playing on a plane, and he thought, okay, this is going to be terrible. Let's check it out.
Here we go.
And he put on his headphones, and he was like, yeah, actually, it still kind of works. I mean, it was like nothing was exactly how he hoped it would be or intended, but a lot of the underlying ideas that were in there still kind of came through in a compromised way. But also, I guess I would hope that as, immersive audio technology gets better / cheaper / more omnipresent and accessible to everybody, that would become less and less of an issue. And you might in the future have things like The Void, where it's location based and you can go with friends, and it's kind of conceived of, and there you have a bit more control over the environment. But because it's a kind of more expensive environment than most people are going to set up in their living rooms, you can have this extra level of fidelity in it. And I'm told we're running out of time, so I'd be happy to nerd out with everybody more about this in the lobby. And then also, if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn, Aaron Berkson on LinkedIn or aaronberkson.com. And thank you very much for joining and for your comments.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. That concludes our middle of the day in the Pacific Northwest session. And we have a break now of about half an hour before we come back in 30 minutes. And actually, we have a whole session, the final workshop session of the day on immersive mixing and production. So we might see you back here for a talk from Scott Selfon and a talk from Jeff Stone. So that would be at 2 o'clock if you're on the West Coast, or in 30 minutes if you are just somewhere else in the world. So see you all then.